Hey, what's up guys? This is Brian at Whisper Status 74. Welcome to the community. Welcome to the channel. If this is the first time you are seeing me, please consider liking and subscribing. We are real tech for real people. Today's video is on buying and returning defective displays. It's about the panel lottery. It's about defective panels and also inherent flaws of just the technology and the manufacturing. Which is something you should bring back, which is something that's going to happen on every panel you purchase. Trying to figure that out is the discussion for today.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
Hey, what's up guys? I am Brian at Whisper Status. Thank you so much for joining me. This is a video that is close to my heart as I've actually been through this, which is the panel lottery, which is buying and returning displays due to defects. What I want to talk about today is the kind of defects that you may be encountering and the bit of a psychosis and you getting to the point to where you can't not see things anymore is the real damage of this cycle. If it gets to be past 2 or 3 returns, especially with the same model, or when you switch models, you're bumping into at times not just defects, but inherent flaws to the technology. And that's something that is so important in this conversation to differentiate. Now, before we go further, the 2 main reasons you'll see or you'll hear from retailers why TVs get returned. They're either too big, they're too small, or people don't like them. And unfortunately, according to retailers, that is not a good enough reason. So this video is not about those of you that have bought TVs and aren't fond of them. People do look at appliances, whether it's refrigerators, anything like that. You cannot go back to a store and say, hey, look, my fridge, I don't like it. They'll simply say to you, if it's defective, we'll take it back. For the most part, refrigerators, air conditioners, heaters, anything along those lines, stoves. I've been through this where I've had defective ones I've had to replace. They don't say, we'll give you a new one. You deal with them for a while. Once your return window closes, you deal with the manufacturer. So with TVs, those are the 2 main reasons people return them. That's not what we're talking about here. I'm not talking about you don't like the panel. I have returned 11 panels. That was in a row. That's why this channel has started. 3 of them were a Vizio. The rest of them were Samsungs, and I had 1 Sony that I returned. But it got to be, and the time it stole from me, and the hardship it created is what I want to discuss with you guys today. On my channel, you have a playlist called 4K Nightmare and What You Can Learn. That playlist is there to break down each individual panel and the challenges that I had. The thing is, there's not one of those panels that I didn't like. It was just they were defective. And I'm trying to get you here to understand which is which. So if we're talking about, for instance, something like OLED, and you're saying, well, hey, it's not super bright. It dims on occasion. ABSL, ABL kicks in. I don't like it. That is not a defect. That is an inherent flaw. Even burn-in is an inherent flaw, meaning it is like indigenous to that particular technology, right or wrong. Now, if you turn on an OLED and in 2 days it burns in, that is a defective panel. I did see a C8 that is a friend of mine that does have burn-in that was earned, and then there's a line defect, which is a defect. So you have an inherent flaw on the same panel, and then a line defect, which is actually defective. You shouldn't have a line down your screen, which isn't burn-in. Something like edgelit bleed, which you would see on edgelit LEDs, or IPS glow, which is when you'd see the black bars on your TV lighting up to like a purple. That is an inherent flaw. That is not a defect. And that's where things get very, very dicey. The reason why I want to talk about this with you today is that if you're those out there that got tripped up with 1 or 2 panels and it starts to hurt, it starts to create an OCD and a bit of a psychosis where you almost have like a performance anxiety. You're sitting there hoping it does well. You're sitting there with the fear when you with the remote. Okay, I'm going to run this scene. Am I going to see it? And that becomes, I know some of you in the comments are going through this. I believe David Whelan, who is part of all of our communities in the YouTube TV group, is going through that now. I don't know the particulars of what he is going through, but I know him and several others. My buddy Ian up in the UK has been through this with a X95 grid pattern. He's been through this with dead pixels. And this video is for you guys. Now, when you get into that level, I'm going to back up for one quick second here. When you get into these TVs and you buy them and you ever have to return them, the time lost and the money lost isn't even including all the research and all the painstaking, oh my God. When I first got my Vizio P series back in the day, I was new to 4K. I was new to YouTube. I had followed a couple YouTubers back then who just had the TV. And I checked all my specs, did all my research. I had the price I wanted. I ordered it. And I was shocked at what happened. Initially, I had a green line right through the screen. If I can find them, I'll put them up on the actual video. I may not even do that, but if it's hard to show them on screen. But I remember saying, okay. And then the HDR processing would literally be stuck in one thing. And then it would just shut off and not work. And actually, I've had more TVs. I had a Vizio Quantum XP series just break on me in the middle of a review. That was returned. Now, also, the returning of TVs is not what I'm talking about here in regards to reviewers. I'm not saying somebody that films their TV, shoots a video, and sends it back. We're not talking about that. And I'm not talking about you not liking your panel. I'm talking about that very gray area of defects and, flaws that are with the technology. Inherent flaws, things that are like, okay, that's part of it. That is where it gets very gray. And that's where the retailer can make you feel like you're losing your mind. When you walk into a Best Buy and you're talking about, hey, I see this, I see that, chances are they're going to tell you, well, hey, that's what's there. And that's where things get crazy. But if you ever buy anything, especially something larger than 55, where you have to have it delivered, and unfortunately now, due to shortages in inventory, even smaller panels have to be delivered. It's like waiting for the cable guy. You have to wait for between 1 and 9. Think about that. I did that 11 times on both ends. How many times did I tip the drivers? How many times did I wait there, unbox, have to call customer service, have to argue, talk to the manufacturer, go through all these different things? The time that adds up ends up becoming more expensive than the actual display. The worst part about it is that time doesn't really teach you anything. You end up actually just losing that time, and at the end of it, there is no TV. I mentioned when sometimes with deliveries, or most times, the carrier will drop off one panel, the other carrier picking up. That's just my heat. I'm not going to keep cutting these videos up because of how cold it is out. But you'll have one carrier drop off a panel or one pickup, one that's going back. You may have to wait even a couple days for the next carrier to deliver. You may find yourself without a TV for a week, which I did. I stared at this empty space with cables everywhere, and it made me crazy. Now, we're talking about, for me, that started at $4,000 for the Vizio P series in 2016. It ended up at about $10,500 for the Samsung KS9800, which was a full array 78-inch. Think about the competitor to the Z9D, just more expensive as it was larger. Now, the flaws with those TVs we're going to talk about in a second. But going back to the wasting of time, that will begin to destroy you. That will begin to get your loved one saying, honey, come upstairs. No, I got it. You're like yelling up the stairs. And you're just trying to run the tests, hard resets. You're running slides. You're running all the different technology. I have literally post-traumatic stress. I'm not using that word lightly. It's not professional to say that. But to certain parts of movies and games that I ran over and over and over again to see if those flaws were there. Namely DSC. Namely, dirty screen effect, for those of you who don't know, vertical banding, dead pixels. See, now inherent flaws, for instance, vertical banding, in some cases, is an inherent flaw. Every single display has it. Think about that for a second. Every single display actually has it to some degree. The larger display, the panel here, is 83 inches. That is a lot of ground to cover. A lot of things at play there. Different filters. There's definitions for what DSC is and banding is, or are, I should say. But the size of the screen. TVs that are 100 inches are going to have much more noticeable banding and screen uniformity. It's a lot of glass. It's a lot of space. When you're watching it, there's your field of view is triple the size. You won't notice it on a smaller panel. So when you guys are buying new TVs, the first thing you do is go larger in size. And the reason why I'm actually doing the video, other than you guys having issues, is I really have always been a Samsung fan. Obviously, going through that many panels from them at their top of the line. I mean, the most expensive TV they had ever made at that point that were for customers. And I saw that going through not just the retailer, but going through them was so painful. They didn't care that the TV cost $12,000. They wouldn't replace it because it was too expensive. They wouldn't change out the motherboard. I went through so many customer service where they'd come here. That's a nice TV, man. They're not going to fix it. So I'd have to return the TV. I mean, soul crushing. And I know David is going through that. I'm not sure what the particulars are in his situation, but the point being, once you get in that road, it is awful, especially when you do what I did, which is start at the low to mid, go all the way to the flagship, and then I had to come back down and settle for a mid, which was the Sony 900E, which I do love with all my heart. But to take that journey from brighter, more vibrant, wider color gamut panels, go all the way up, deal with all their flaws and issues, and then come all the way down and deal with a mid-range Sony. If you watch my first Sony video on the 900E, it's Modern Warfare Remaster. I don't sound happy. And that TV's fantastic, but it wasn't that sexiness. It didn't have that, oh my God. So part of this is that we build up what they're going to be. And what I'm telling you now at 11 minutes in is there is no perfect display. Not just that there isn't a perfect technology, again, inherent flaws, 8K, mini LED, LED, edge-lit, IPS, OLEDs, QD OLEDs, doesn't matter, projectors, there will always be an issue with the technology. Then you have issues with the source. There's anything built by man is going to have issues, or robot. Displays are harder to differentiate. If you have a problem with your Xbox, it doesn't run 100%. It might be a little louder, but the image still goes on screen. The display is actually displaying the image. So more than any other thing you have, other than your phone, which is tiny, maybe your laptop, the flaws are just there. They're there on your phone too. You just don't see them simply because of the size, and you're not really knowing what you're looking for. TVs are alone in that regard. So, getting back to CES, Samsung, to me, their vibrancy, their color gamut, their design, the way they operate is something I've always liked. Samsung's, to me, even their saturation of their image, I don't care if they were accurate. I love their vibrancy. I had the Samsung LED Touch of Red. I loved that panel. No problems with it from a structural place as far as manufacturing or powering on, powering off. And that's another thing we'll talk about really quickly too, is structural damage. That's the easy one. Broken screen, broken chassis, put it back in the box, send it back. That part also goes with the other two I mentioned that are simple. Those are easy returns. Don't hesitate, bring it back. Not liking it, and it's too small or too big, those aren't going to be loved by the manufacturer or retailer. The other one being broken chassis, there's nothing they can say. That is a defect. They're looking for that. Everything else is fair game for them to tell you to go to hell. A manufacturer typically isn't going to say anything about DSC and things of that nature. Back to Samsung, I think the QN900A, when I walk into the store, is the best looking panel off. I mean, it's bezel-less, it's gorgeous, it always grabs me, it's so bright, it's so vibrant. So when someone says to me, and I almost did a video, I should have done it, called Why Not Samsung, you know, why wouldn't I get one, is because I can't guarantee they'll be good in regards to DSC and screen uniformity. Every Samsung 4K panel I've had has had terrible DSC. Now, the ones that I brought back, the KS9800, the first videos on this channel are actually the KS9800, had blue lightning down the screen. I had 3 of those. The KS9000 was edge-lit. It was beautiful. Again, off steel and sharp. I mean, even the edges could cut you. The edge-lit bleed on that, you could actually see the lamps shooting into the screen. They look like floodlights. And I would bring that into Best Buy and say, what is this? Oh, yeah, no, it's fine. It's the way they are. Unfortunately, those were inherent flaws of that particular model, right? To me, that's a defect. Not to mention every other Samsung I had a significant amount of dead pixels. By the time I got to my 8th or 9th, my face was to the screen. It's like painting a wall and looking for brushstrokes. You can make yourself absolutely crazy. You're pixel peeping. You're looking for everything. And I think that's where some of you are. I think some of you have had bad experiences with your first couple models. You've seen DSC or you've seen banding. And then now that you're on your 5th or 6th, you're looking for a clean panel. And unfortunately, I have to tell you, they don't exist. Every OLED that I've ever had has some form of banding. Some form of it. Now, again, I know I'm all over the place. That's my style. That's how I film. But my experiences were all solid defects. What I'll tell you, though, is by the time I got to the end of it, I had to go with an OLED after, simply because I had become so allergic to blooming and like an IPS glow. We call it IPS glow, but it's really called flash lighting. It's the bluish black bars. I had gotten so allergic to that, but I was also coming from a plasma. So part of this conversation is, what kind of panel are you coming from? If you're somebody who's had a plasma and an OLED, it's very hard for me to recommend a mini LED or an LED. You've never even seen blooming before, but if you're somebody who's going from a 42-inch plasma to a 75-inch LED, you might be shocked that, what are these gray black bars? What is this haloing? My issue was 2016, 2017, more the birth of HDR. All the TVs were absolute messes. My last return was the Sony 940E. It had a very, very slow pixel response. So for gaming, it blurred everywhere. But the main reason why I ended up bringing it back is it had vertical banding right down the screen. You could see, I have videos of that too. You could see literally 2 columns. That is an inherent flaw. That is a defect, if you know what I mean. So, all this said, the psychosis that some of you may be feeling, the OCD, you have to be able to, if it's David or whoever's watching that's going through this, you need to time out. Take an absolute break, especially now that we have the new panels coming out. The problem with what you're going through is you're dealing with the same retailer. If you're dealing with a Best Buy, they will block you at a certain part. I was on that list. What's ironic, I was on that list before I became a YouTuber, right? And I had friends that worked there. And they're like, dude, you're on the list. And I'm like, well, I've spent thousands here, well before I went through this. And the TVs that I'm buying and returning are the same one. They were all a KS, it was a Vizio, then a KS9000. 2 different TVs, 3 of one, which literally powered off, had a green line through it, so it wasn't my imagination. The KS9000s had dead pixels in the center of the screen and had terrible flash lighting. I had pictures of it, I showed it to them, and they looked at me like I was crazy. It was the walk of shame. It was awful. You could see them scatter as I walked in. The ironic thing is my Vizio might still be there. It was in the break room, in their break room, 75 inches, the whole screen green, but the little box. A little box showing the image. The rest of it was green. And I was the crazy one. Meaning they just want to get you out of there and just not deal with you returning them. And plus, and I'll tell you this, you do end up changing your demeanor when you're going through this. You'll either roll up not happy, or you're just kind of like, well, this is kind of, you get this nervousness and you're over-explaining. You're like, okay, so there's grayness on, it's like when you walk in a DMV, you're trying to be as nice and as polite and nervous just to get in and out. You feel that. And you're dealing with people that aren't sympathetic. They're not, oh my God, poor you. What was that, 7,000? Oh, stupid. You end up with haters in that regard. That happens here in the comments as well. So talking about that, what is the inherent flaws, as I mentioned? With Samsung, when we talk about their new OLEDs, the Quantum QD OLEDs, or mini LEDs, or anything like that, whenever I think about buying a Samsung, the same thing always goes through my mind. Am I guaranteed to have a clean one? And right away, the answer is no. So any of you that I've talked outside of YouTube, I've always said, if I can get a clean one, I'm definitely going to go, I'd go with the Samsung, but I can't guarantee that. And I know their customer service in regards to that is terrible. Not only are they terrible dealing with the customer service, dealing with the retailer is difficult. They're not sympathetic to the retailer. So you're looking behind me, you see my friend Jennifer Gala's, picture behind me, her demo. Those bars are black. When I would see my Samsung, you would see jets of light shooting into the screen. So not only did you have a purplish black bars, you would literally have jets of light, like spotlights. And it was nuts. So that would still be considered not a defect, an inherent flaw to that particular model at that time. I do believe the frames were trying to be too thin. I do believe they squeezed against the edge. That's simple. Manufacturing is at fault. Deliveries are at fault. Again, larger panels, they get like that. Dead pixels. They are considered an inherent flaw as well. If you talk to Samsung and some of the other manufacturers, they do have a tolerance of 11, 12 dead pixels. To me, I will return them every single time. I don't care if there's one dead pixel. The problem is many of us probably have dead pixels and don't know it, but by the time you get to your third or fourth return, your nose is so close to the screen, you're going to find an issue. There's dead pixels, there's stuck pixels. Dead pixels are typically black or gray. Stuck pixels are typically a stuck color. You can try the massaging technique. You can look that up online. You can try to unlock it. Again, massage it with a towel. Sometimes that'll help. But dead pixels are a big no-no. To me, that is a defect. Structural damage, dead pixels, they have to go back. DSC is the big one. The definition of DSC actually goes into light filters and light penetration and all that. To me, it is the glass, it is the manufacturing, it's not uniformed. But the content that you watch will show it. You will not see it on a demo. That is the challenge with demo material in stores. They don't have panning shots of white. Typically, what we see DSC in is gaming. A lot of times, if you watch something pan across the screen, modern-wise, Joey, who was a big YouTuber, and shout out to Joey, actually has the hockey. He created that hockey dirty screen effect demo that so many YouTubers use. Joey, shout out to Joey. Hope you're doing well, my friend. He has a hockey rink, and he has a guy moving up and down. When you're watching hockey, you're like, oh my God, what is that? What's on the screen? The panning, the content's not full 4K, full 8K. Mix that together, the compression of your cable box, and it can make you absolutely nuts. OLEDs having like a bluish gray white, that's an inherent flaw. That is not a defect. You see where I'm going? As white shows up, actually it looks pretty white. But that is where I'm getting, guys, is trying to differentiate. Once you get past a certain amount of returns, you will be seeing shadows and ghosts in every corner. Once you get to that point, you need to unplug and say, okay, now that's not white. Well, that's not like it's supposed to be. But you get to that point to where no matter what I show you, you're going to find it. So I had a B8 for a period of time, and I didn't notice any banding on that at all. That panel was super clean. It was 55 inches. But the differences with the OLEDs, even in the C8 and the B8, they were better at being black, right? They crush blacks, but the contrast ratio, there wasn't this grayish black that we see with OLEDs today. You know, Sony's, LG's have problems coming out of black. Not to mention the content we watch, guys. A lot of the HDR games that we play, I go through it all the time. Forza Halo, the new, not Halo so much, but as Call of Duty Vanguard, there's this like 5% gray area where they're not black. It's like a light bluish gray, and it's in HDR, and it shows banding everywhere. Now, if you have an OLED and you see that, that is an inherent flaw. That will always be there. In this house, I've had the B8, 2 CXs, a C1, and a Sony A9S Master Series. When I noticed blooming, or I should say noticed banding on my 77-inch, which had it horribly, I then took every other OLED and broke it down with the same content. The smaller panels definitely had it once I started searching for it, and that is key. So I was actually pretty disheartened to see banding on OLEDs. When I had noticed banding on other OLEDs I had tested in the past, it was typically off angle with red and green slides. You won't always see banding with slides if they're fading in and fading out, even at 5% gray. What you'll typically see it is in and out and then sliding back and forth. Now, when I had seen my CX, my 77-inch had very heavy banding on one side, that was visible in content. Now, going there quickly, you'll hear that with ratings.com a lot when they're talking about the panel has a hot spot in the middle or brighter. Sony's all have darker corners, by the way. All their LEDs is just part of their, that's an inherent flaw, actually. Our things, the ratings will say, you know, it's not visible in content. That's the real key. When you're testing TVs and you're looking at slides, the problem is that's not content. When you notice it for me, with my CX, which definitely had a processing issue, is that when there was waves or in a movie, you could see it pixelate. You could see dithering in the blacks. You could see raised blacks. So mine definitely had an issue. The banding was actually visible in every type of scene. But with OLEDs, and trust me when I tell you, and I don't want to tell you this because I want you to just enjoy it. If you're looking at anything, the Venetian effect that a lot of the bigger YouTubers have used. I was talking about that long before they did because none of their testing showed this hexagon spider web effect. I had seen that. Why did I see it? Well, because I use it for content and I had a 77-inch and I'm close. If you step back, you know, farther, you may not see it. But if you're pretty close to an image, you're going to see it. If you're in a movie theater and the screen's dirty, you're going to see it. So I think a lot of people that review TVs, even the larger YouTube channels, are they're literally, even Digital Trends, Vincent, the bigger respected channels are typically reviewing 55 and 65-inch panels. Ratings.com buys their own panels. They can't buy a bunch of 75-inch or 77. They'd be out of business. So they're judging of how the panels behave. They're not really in a running tests. For you, do you see it in content? Are you noticing it when you're watching? If you're laying down, this happens too. You're laying down and you're watching a panning shot with a spaceship. Do you see banding there? My TV, the CX at the time, was fluttering. The blacks would pop in and out. LEDs, there's a thing called jail bars. You'll see in white, which is so funny because you'll say, if you're struggling with white, leave an OLED and go to an LED. True. LEDs have that striking white. It's pure white. The problem is Samsung QN900R, I had that panel. My friend Jennifer Galla has that one as well. When I'm in a driving game, I could see jail bars, which is literally the space in between the zones. You can actually see a shadow of that. The X95J at last year's, the 85 inches, some people saw grid patterns. Now, grid patterns on those panels might have been a defect. It wasn't on all of them. But then you have the X-wide viewing angle, which knocked down the contrast ratio, created a rainbow effect. That's an inherent flaw. So if you understand with what I'm saying is the difference is you almost have to do that extra step of research and to know each one of these have their drawbacks. You want a brighter TV? I do. You're not going to have the blacks that go with the darker TVs. And now that we're getting where mini LEDs have better blacks and they're brighter, they're all coming together and they're all having the same issues. You're seeing OLEDs with more banding. Why? They're trying to be brighter, and the content and the way that I'm telling you, when OLEDs were crushing blacks, when they first came out, same with plasmas, no talk of banding. I mean, none. Everyone said, and if you have an OLED, do this for me. The OLED light is not what I'm talking about. If you see that you're having some banding, for instance, and you're playing a game like Deathloop, not Modern Warfare, Call of Duty Vanguard, go into your brightness settings, they're at 50, and knock it down to 48 or 47. I promise you, when you walk into a room which is dark, it may be a little bit too dark, your banding will absolutely disappear. That's why, in my opinion, 3-4 years ago, OLEDs had no discussion in black for banding other than slides. Now that they're trying to be brighter, they're coming out of black. You're seeing more banding. And how can you tell if banding is an inherent flaw with OLEDs? Typically, it's uniformed. It'll be pretty uniformed across the entire screen, and you'll only really notice it in that 5% gray. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, once you see it, you can't unsee it. You become allergic to it. And to the point where the content you're watching now, unfortunately, these terrible HDR games have terrible contrast ratios. They're faded. There's nothing you can do about it either. If you lower that brightness, it does hurt HDR. This is just OLEDs, I might add. The way that there's no blacks in these games. If you watch even the intro to Halo, it's gray. It gets better as the game goes on, but the black levels have become this 5% gray, which is really the Achilles heel of OLED. But same with LEDs and blooming. Now that we have less zones in these panels, we have more complicated algorithms for local dimming. They're not perfect. They're reacting to what's on screen. So we're seeing lower contrast ratios on LEDs, gray or blacks. That is not a defect. That is an inherent flaw. So you can see how these inherent flaws and real defects can smash into each other. For me, with banding, how to really deduce if it's really a problem. And if you first get your TV, my total advice to you is, one, check it for structural damage. Obviously, your screen, the chassis. Set it up. Go through your process. Horrible banding is visible in the setup because it's 5% gray or it's slightly black. You'll see a lot of that initially. And LEDs, you can't determine flashlighting in those menus because most of the manufacturers are disabling their local dimming during those menus. Should have mentioned that. After the 900E, 900F, 950G, even Samsung, I believe, they do this. Once you're in a menu and content is not playing, they disable local dimming. You won't see it in the menu. It won't say local dimming off. It'll simply turn grayish. So you start seeing blooming in your Netflix menus or your Xbox menus. You're like, what the heck is going on? That is an inherent flaw. That is not a defect. You see where we're going with this? It gets a little dicey. So, back to what I'm saying. Check the TV for structural damage, i.e. glass or chassis. Set it up, go through your setup, and immediately start watching content. Say to yourself, I have this many days for my return window. Most places it's 15 days. If you're an elite member at Best Buy, it could be 40 days. If you're at Costco, it can be 90 days, and so on and so forth. Then what I would do is continue to watch content, work it hard. Not just these demos, your movies, your gaming, driving games are notorious. First-person shooters, third-person games like Uncharted, where you're literally watching over the person's shoulder. And I would see in Uncharted, especially Uncharted 4, I would see it go across the screen and you would see this big band in the middle. Rock those games. Do not start with slides. Do not start checking it that way. I know you want to. The problem is, once you start noticing the things that show up in slides, you'll be looking for them. And after 30 plus minutes, I know these videos are long, stop looking for them. It's hard to say that when you've had so many letdowns. I don't know what a lot of you are going through. But once you get looking for banding, you will find it 100% of the time. I was playing Need for Speed today, on this panel. 83-inch C1. What I was looking at while I was driving, perfect, flawless. Out of the corner of my eye, as I glance up into the horizon, I feel like I'm seeing banding because the shadows. I look up, it disappears. I look down, it's there. I'm not saying this, I don't know what I'm talking about. Believe me, I fight it every single day. This is the cleanest OLED I've ever had at 83. And there's banding there. There's banding in every one I've ever seen. So you have to be aware that some of it is inherent to the panel. Some of it is inherently going to be there. The Evo panel we saw with LG last year, and Sony's had it too. Some of those had a slight pink tint. That is an inherent flaw. Now, if it was pink on one side and it was really deep, that is a defect. Do you follow me? So for a lot of the DSC and banding, if it's uniform and it's throughout the entire screen, that's there. And you have to almost decide how much of that will I deal with, because I promise you, you'll bring back 10 OLEDs and they will all have that flaw. Edge-lit panels, other than maybe the 930E, all had terrible flash lighting. And actually that panel did with but those were defects because that panel had a backlight that was like a full array edge-lit. So that was an inherent flaw being edge-lit, but the ones that had so let's just say it's for flash lighting again. If you're in the corner of the screens here, if one side is totally bright and the other side is dark, that is a defect. If all four corners are a little bit bright, that's an inherent flaw. And the problem is when you get to the place where I was, or my friend David is, or some of you get on that 5th or 6th panel, everything is bad. And you can't stop looking in. You can't stop looking for banding. You can't enjoy content anymore. Then it's time to stop the relationship with the retailer. Hey, look, I'm taking a break. Give me my money back and just reset it. And unfortunately, there's very few retailers you can continue to go to. Can't go to small retailers. You'll hurt them by bringing back a bunch of panels. And you feel like a psychopath because you're like, well, I'm telling you, it's got this. The problem is you've gotten so damaged that you've developed like an OCD and a post-traumatic stress to looking for it. So really say to yourself, is it there or am I looking for it? Dead pixels, structural damage, uneven banding, big bars through the middle of your screen, send it back. Do not hesitate. You're watching content. If you see it in every kind of content you watch, take it back. Don't hesitate. When to run slides and things of that nature. If you start noticing banding in regular content, that's when you say, okay, you know what? I'm seeing it. I think it's here in the corner, quite a bit of it. Let me go ahead and run a slide. Don't run them first, because once you see them, you can't unsee them. And trust me, it will change you. It will hurt you. It will alter your life. You will not be fun to be around. You'll feel like you're a nut. And I'm telling you, they will not pick up the phone anymore when you walk into Best Buy or, Costco's good like that because you're a member, but retailers are they're not going to want to hear it. And I tell you, manufacturers want to hear it even less, especially Samsung. So love Samsung. I hope they get better at that. But this whole thing was, Bri, what do you think about buying a QN900A or whatever? I recommend them every day, because my experience is a small slice. But in my experience, if I could get a clean one, I'd give it a shot. But I can't guarantee that. The banding and stuff you see on OLEDs, as I mentioned, it's always going to be there. The question is, how much? If it's in your line of sight, if it's in the middle of the screen, that is no good. That should go back. But I'm telling you, you hit that 5% gray, even those of you that think you have a clean panel, trust me, they're there. And the content will show it. So please do not go nuts. Don't hurt anybody, but just know at a certain point, it will create that OCD of pixel peeping. And if you have that, it's time to take a break and kind of give up on it for a little while. I hate to say that, but you're going to have to. But inherent flaws and defects, so close. It's up to you to try and differentiate which one is which. All right, guys, I am Brian at Whisper Status. I know it's a 35-minute video. Please let me know what you think in the comments. What experiences have you had as far back as plasma or LEDs? I know for me, edge lip bleed, flash lighting, dead pixels, blue lightning down the screen, not to mention cracked screens. But there is that area where you have to say to yourself, oh my God, these all have it. There is no perfect panel. And if anybody sits up here and says to you, yeah, man, mine's 100% clean, they're not. At the end of the video, I will tell you this. OLEDs do improve. I should have said that in the beginning of the video. Plasmas were the same way. The nature of the pixels, they do break in. The problem is breaking in panels few hundred hours is not easy to get to. So your return window will be shut. LEDs do not improve. DSC is always going to be there. You won't even get used to it. And the problem with DSC and things of that nature, if you notice it now, you're not going to forget about it. It's going to get worse and worse. Banding does dissipate. These pixels do age. They don't die. I know there's pixel rot conversations, but the fact is they do improve after they break in. So keep that in mind. But if it's big, deep, dark bands, that is there. And you have to kind of act accordingly. All right, guys, I'm Brian at Whisper Status 74. Let me know what you think. Again, before I leave, if you have none of these issues, you don't see anything, ignorance is absolute bliss. Do not, I repeat, do not go looking for it. Don't grab a slide and say, let me check it out. Do not. The reason why I can't show you pictures of it, a lot of that is very difficult to show you on screen. Between the camera, it's very hard to actually show it with compression and everything else. So don't go looking for it. Ignorance is absolute bliss. But if you're in that spot, like my buddy David and some of you others, it's time to take a break, pull your money back, and just wait for something else. Totally switch manufacturers. But remember, inherent flaws versus defects, it's a very dicey gray area. All right, guys, thanks so much. Love you.